Mike, hello. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I would just say that was Big Fanny with Little Fanny, and then Nathan Wade. I mean, this guy, hasn't he earned his $700,000 yet? He's still with Big Fanny.
you gotta pay off those loans, man. They have interest. All right, you gotta pay out. You gotta pay with interest. Okay, and the interest rates are high right now. So Nathan Wade is I guess doing the work for all the rest of us. Poor guy. We should probably send him a sympathy card. I'm not sure if they make one sad enough for Nathan Wade, but here we are. Judge Chutkan, Mike, I want to get you to respond to this. I assume you are in Washington, D.C. Judge Chutkan, reversed by the Supreme Court and criticized by Chief Justices for rushing the immunity order, came out swinging this morning. The hearing just ended for Donald Trump in D.C. Apparently, she was condescending, smug, intemperate, unprepared, and angry and visceral towards the Trump lawyers in that case. This happening in Washington. Jack Smith humiliated and disgraced, but is back in court today. Your thoughts?
It sounds like D.C. Obama Judge Tanya Chutkan is well on her way to another reversal by the Supreme Court of the United States. It sounds like she is indignant and she doesn't want to follow the Supreme Court's 6-3 presidential immunity decision, where the president of the United States, any president of the United States, is immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, not his personal acts, just like presidents have been immune from civil prosecution for their official acts going back 40 years to the Nixon decision by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court simply extended the Nixon decision from the civil context to the criminal context. This is just happening now. This is unprecedented. The Supreme Court had to do this because this is the first time ever a former president has been charged with any crime. And you have this Biden-Kamala orchestrated lawfare against President Trump with 4 different criminal indictments in 4 different jurisdictions based upon bogus criminal charges. And so the Supreme Court is, they tried to bankrupt Trump. They tried to throw him in prison for the rest of his life. They tried to throw him off the ballot in Colorado and Maine. The Supreme Court stopped them. And so what are they trying to do? They want to destroy the Supreme Court that got in their way with court packing and term limits and impeachment and ethics regimes. They want to underfund Trump's Secret Service detail and almost get his head blown off. And that's not good enough. So now this is like the Freddy Krueger lawfare. They have their ears blown off and their arms blown off and their eyes blown off, but they're coming back. It's like Freddy Krueger Part 6. They just won't go away.
It is merely a flesh wound.
Yes.
So how is this legal? How is it possible? Sorry, I knocked over my gavel. I'm such a legal expert here, Mike, and I'm so good with the gavel. How do you possibly push forward after that Supreme Court smackdown, and also after the humiliating smackdown that you've talked about on this program quite gleefully, because you were the only one predicting it, in Florida, where the Eileen Cannon says Jack Smith isn't real?
You don't. So here's what's going to happen. You have this DC Obama judge, Tanya Chutkan, who's largely going to ignore the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling, both the letter and the spirit of it, because Jack Smith is a buffoon and he'll push her to do that. And then that will be immediately appealable to the DC Circuit. And if the DC Circuit rules against Trump again, because they're a bunch of Democrat hacks and weak Republican judges, then it will go to the Supreme Court again and Trump will win at the Supreme Court. This case is not going to get resolved before the presidential election. The more likely scenario is Trump is going to win on November 5th. And then on day 1, on January 20th, his acting attorney general must dismiss these charges against Trump with prejudice and fire Jack Smith and open a probe on this unprecedented Republic-ending lawfare and election interference by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Merrick Garland, Jack Smith, Jay Bratz, Matthew Colangelo, Alvin Bragg, Tish James, Nathan Wade, Fani Willis, Judge Juan Merchan. There's a whole cast of characters who are engaged in a criminal conspiracy to violate the constitutional rights of President Trump. His top aides like Peter Navarro, who went to prison, Steve Bannon, who's in prison, his January 6th supporters who were politically persecuted, yes, persecuted under the Supreme Court's Fisher decision, parents, being chased by the FBI for expressing outrage at gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes and bathrooms, Christians going to prison for praying outside of abortion clinics, while they give amnesty to Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and BLM and Antifa and Hamas. There must be accountability for what they've done to our country.
So you brought up Juan Merchan, name dropped. This is in the news. America First Legal suing Juan Merchan for his financial disclosures. Apparently, he has not been making them. But more importantly, in 10 days approximately, so Juan Merchan may very well send Trump to prison. You've been saying this, actually. You've been predicting this on the program years ago, Mike. You have a record of coming on this show and being like, be careful, because the goal is to put Trump in jail before the election. Can you please, since we are on the eve of this happening, can you please game theory that out? Are they waiting to see how well Trump does against Kamala Harris? And if she craters like Biden did, this is like the act of last resort?
There is no question that their goal is to put President Trump in prison for the rest of his life, because they fear American voters on November 5th, and early voting starts in like a week, right? So they want to interfere in this election. They know, if you look at the polling, they know that Kamala has come down from her post-coup bounce. She didn't get a post-convention bounce. RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard stole that from her, and they're going to get desperate. And they see the polling now where Trump is steadily going ahead of Kamala, including in all these key swing states. He's going to win handily so long as his supporters show up and vote as early as possible. And this is going to be their last ditch effort, is to throw Trump in prison. That's going to be their Hail Mary. And selfishly, as a political hack, I actually hope that Judge Merchan, this corrupt judge whose daughter, Lauren Merchan, has raised millions of dollars off of this unprecedented criminal prosecution over which her father, Judge Juan Merchan, this Democrat Biden Kamala donor, this hack who should have recused this corrupt judge. I actually hope that Merchan is stupid enough to put Trump in jail even for an hour, because the Supreme Court of the United States will step in very quickly and stop it. And they're going to turn Trump into Nelson Mandela. If you thought that mugshot help Trump politically, put him in Rikers Island for an hour and see what happens.
So, okay, please unpack that. So how does the Supreme Court intervene there? Can you game theory this? Because I do, it's clearly like game theorying to that moment, right? They're not going to miss their opportunity here. I do firmly believe that. And they're going to, I believe, apply an extreme pressure to put Trump in prison. They can't help themselves, right?
Yeah.
They truly cannot. They are rabid. And so then game theory, what happens then? We have all seen the reports of the National Guard now being stationed all over New York City. What happens next?
Well, I think what would happen is if Judge Juan Merchan, this corrupt judge who's required to recuse under New York law because his daughter is making money off of this case, it goes out like 6 degrees of separation under New York statute. The daughter's in the 1st degree. Lauren Merchan's raising money. Lauren Merchan just got paid by the Kamala campaign. We found that FEC report, that payment. So the daughter's now working for Kamala, Lauren Merchan. She's a leading fundraiser. This requires Merchan's recusal. But he's not going to do that. He's corrupt. So there are so many reversible errors with this case. Number one being that they didn't tell us what the crime was. We still don't know what the crime was, let alone a unanimous jury verdict on what the crime is. We don't know what the crime is even after the trial. That's a problem. The defendant can't defend himself if he doesn't know the crime. And it's not a crime what Trump did. A businessman settling a nuisance claim and booking it in his private books as a legal expense is not a crime. That's what you do. I've been a lawyer for nearly 20 years. That's how business people settle these things. The biggest problem right now is the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision, where the Supreme Court not only held you can't prosecute presidents for their official acts, you also can't use evidence of the president's official acts against him in a criminal prosecution. And that's exactly what this Soros-funded Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, and this Biden-Kamala senior political appointee in the Justice Department, Matthew Colangelo, did. They fought like hell to get Trump's conversations with Hope Hicks, his deputy White House chief of staff for communications, along with President Trump's deputy White House chief of staff for operations, Madeline. Both of those conversations are subject to presidential immunity. The Supreme Court made that very clear in June. You can't use that evidence. And Bragg and Colangelo and Mershon used that evidence, both with the indictment with the grand jury and at trial. Now they're trying to say, oh, that evidence wasn't that important. It was cumulative, blah, blah, blah. Well, why did you fight so hard to get that evidence? Why did you fight over President Trump's objections? Why did you eviscerate 250 years of constitutional executive privilege going back to George Washington? If that evidence wasn't so important, why did you fight so hard to get it? It clearly was. And so Judge Mershon has to declare a mistrial on that issue alone. And he's not going to. He's going to move forward because he's a hack and he's corrupt, and his daughter, Laura Mershon's making money. And they will, if they move forward and put Trump in Rikers Island, Trump will be able to get emergency relief with the Supreme Court almost immediately. And the Supreme Court, there is no doubt in my mind the Supreme Court will step in and stop this. They will stay the execution of judgment. They will say you cannot put Trump in prison pending the appeal of this case. This case is going to take years to appeal.
So the Supreme Court has the power to do that, because that's the one thing that the structures that I've been missing is the power of the Supreme Court to step into these state matters that seem to have been designed in order to stop some type of federal intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. The Supreme Court they are the Supreme Court in the lands, and they have jurisdiction over both federal courts and all state courts. And when state courts are violating federal law, when state courts are violating the U.S. Constitution, the Supreme Court absolutely must step in, especially when you're dealing with something as important as the presidency. A former and likely future president of the United States, some corrupt judge and some hack prosecutor in some hellhole courthouse in New York City. They think that they got to just throw the former president and likely future president of the United States in prison based upon bogus charges where we don't even know what the legal allegations are after the trial. It's not going to fly.
Just very quickly, Mike, I know that you really wanted to speak on presidential immunity, and you came on our show and you educated our audience for quite a long interview on what that means. It seems like all of these cases are just rife with landmines where they overstepped presidential immunity and just completely eviscerate and atomized that privilege for the president. How do any of these cases move forward given the Supreme Court's ruling? It seems like we're living in a totally dual lane of justice here that like somehow operates outside of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, I remember defending Trump after Mar-a-Lago more than 2 years ago. Pretty lonely effort at first. I noticed a lot more Republican lawyers, the rats who swam away from what they thought was the sinking ship, are now swimming back to USS Trump because they want jobs. But I would say this, that I took a lot of heat for what I said. And I admit that I'm a jerk, but I am almost always right. Like I was on this, and I was right on presidential immunity. Very right, 6-3 right. And the other side was very wrong. And I'll tell you, the biggest winner of this, and he's too stupid and dumb to realize this, is President Joe Biden, because he's not going to be the president on January 20th at 12:01 p.m. And Trump's going to win, but even if Kamala wins, does Joe Biden think that Kamala is going to protect him after Kamala gutted him in a bloodless coup? So Joe Biden, who is corrupt as hell, has $20 million going from China and every other foreign country into his bank accounts, every Biden family member's bank accounts. China controls him. I guess, we're going to talk about Russia, but China controls Joe Biden, right? And Joe Biden could face criminal prosecution after January 20th at 12:01 because his wing woman, Kamala, won't even protect him. And, so Joe Biden, he's too stupid to understand this, but he's the biggest winner of presidential immunity.
Mike Davis giving legal advice to Joe Biden on the program and congratulating him. This is something very rare. Mike Davis is someone very rare, an actual Republican lawyer with a set of balls who actually fights and says true things and is not unafraid of doing that. So, Mike, God bless you. Godspeed. Here's how you follow Mike on social media and support his incredible organization that is staffed actually stem to stern with Republican lawyers with iron spines. Mike, I like your new profile backdrop. I like your new profile cover. Yeah. It's very, very, very good. Maybe someday when we're both dead, we'll finally learn the motive of Thomas Crooks. One of these days.
Thank you, Ben.
Godspeed, Mike.